My stepchildren hired a lawyer and demanded that I sign away my baby's inheritance rights when they found out I was pregnant at 42 years old. Before I start telling my story, tell me where you're watching this video from. Let's go. I never imagined that at 42 years old I would be here, writing all of this as if it were a public vent. But that's exactly what I am now. A pregnant woman, misunderstood, surrounded by people who seem to want to destroy me just because my uterus decided to do something that I myself didn't expect to happen. My name is Daniela, and this is my story. When I met Julio, I was 22 years old and had just ended a relationship that left me quite shaken. He was 45, divorced, and had 3 adult or nearly adult children from his first marriage. It wasn't that love at first sight you read about in novels. It was something more discreet, more real. He was self-assured, had his life structured, and somehow, that attracted me. On the 3rd date, Julio got straight to the point. He told me, with a firmness that left no room for doubt, that he was done with the phase of having children. That he had raised his 3 with dedication, that he was entering a new stage of life, and that he needed to be sure I understood and accepted this before our relationship became more serious. At that time, I really wasn't sure if I wanted children. I was never that girl who cooed over babies or played with dolls. My life was about freedom. Waking up late on weekends, traveling whenever I felt like it, not having responsibilities that would tie me down. So, with all the sincerity of my 22-year-old heart, I agreed with him. We built a life based on that agreement. The first 10 years were perfect. We traveled to incredible places. We bought a beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood. We had the freedom we so desired. We didn't even need to be discreet about not having children, because for us it simply wasn't a question. It was a decision made. But somewhere around the 10-year mark of our relationship, something changed inside me, and I couldn't even tell exactly when it started. First, Julio's youngest daughter had a baby. Then his son had twins. My younger sister got pregnant. Then my best friend did too. Suddenly, it seemed like everyone around me was entering this dimension of motherhood that I had deliberately rejected, and there was a pain in my chest. A pain I couldn't name because I had made a promise. This pain started small. A comment here, a disguised envy there. Always when I passed by someone's house and saw a child's room, or when I held my nephew in my arms and felt his weight, his warmth, his innocent breathing, or when I saw ultrasound videos in family groups and the aunts filled with joy. I never mentioned any of this to Julio. What would be the point? We had an agreement established 20 years ago. He was already in his 60s. His children were adults. He was talking about retirement, about that boat he always wanted to buy, about finally having time to travel to all those countries we put on the list. Bringing up the subject of babies would have been completely irresponsible on my part. It would be like changing the rules of the game in the middle of a match that had already lasted 2 decades. So I buried that feeling deep down. And I went on to build a life that pretended satisfaction. But one day my period didn't come. At first I didn't even pay attention. At 42 years old, my body was starting to do strange things. My cycle became irregular. Some months it skipped. I thought it was just signs that my menopause was beginning. It was even a relief, I thought, because it would be one more liberation. But after 9 days without my period, something in me trembled. I was certain I knew my body too well not to know what it meant. I bought a test. Actually, I bought 3. All positive. 2 clear lines on each one. I took the test 3 times that day, at different times, always with the same result. My heart raced each time I saw that result, and I didn't know if it was fear or something that dangerously resembled joy. I couldn't sleep that night. My body vibrated with adrenaline. My mind spun in circles. I had a child inside me. A child that shouldn't exist. A child that would change absolutely everything. The next day, scheduling that appointment was the hardest thing I'd ever done. My hand trembled as I typed the number. The receptionist asked if it was for next year. I said no, that it was urgent. She fit me in for the following week. That whole week, I couldn't tell Julio anything. I just functioned. I went to work, came home, ate, pretended to sleep. My mind was a constant blur. Julio knew something was wrong. He always knows. It had been 20 years together after all. He asked me if everything was okay, if something had happened at work, if I was feeling sick. I just kept saying everything was fine, just tired. But I couldn't look him in the eyes. The first thing that attacked me was my sister. Right in the middle of that endless week, she posted on Facebook a pregnancy test with hearts drawn around it. Her first child was only 2 years old. And now there would be another. The coincidence was almost cruel. As if the universe was mocking me. telling me that while I rushed to undo that life growing inside me, the whole world was busy creating theirs. At work, things got worse. A colleague mentioned that she might be pregnant. Then everyone started telling stories. How they found out. How they told their partners. Funny ultrasound stories. And I was there, leaning over my desk, trying to breathe normally while my own secret suffocated me. I spent 20 minutes locked in an office bathroom. Just breathing. Trying not to fall apart. When I got home that night, Julio found me simply staring at the wall of our bedroom. Doing nothing. Thinking about nothing in particular. Just existing in the void. He sat down beside me and put his hand on my knee. He asked what was really going on. And somehow, with my voice breaking, I just told him everything. I said my period was very late. That I had taken tests. And that they had all come back positive. Julio went still. Completely frozen beside me. He stood up and walked to the window. He stood there in silence for a time that seemed like an eternity to me. When he finally spoke, his words were like hammers. He was 65 years old. At 70, my son would be entering school. At 83, at high school graduation. He questioned whether it was fair to bring a child into the world with such an old father. And he reminded me of the agreement we made 20 years ago. I agreed with everything he said. I said I had already scheduled a procedure. That he was right about everything. And then, in a way I barely recognized in my own voice, I asked him to let me be sad without trying to fix things with logic. He asked if I would leave him because of this. I said no. And I really meant it. Despite everything, I couldn't imagine my life without Julio. 20 years was no joke. It was my entire adult life. So I asked, trembling, if he would leave me if I decided to keep the pregnancy. And here comes the part where everything changes. Julio took a deep breath and said something I completely didn't expect to hear. He said he had thought about it over the years. That he knew I would probably be a very good mother. That his biggest concern wasn't really his age or our agreement, but whether I would be able to live with the regret if I really went through with the abortion. He suggested I go to the doctor first. That we make sure everything was healthy and normal. And then we'd talk about everything for real. I nodded while tears streamed down my face. The appointment was 3 days later. The ultrasound technician put that cold gel on my stomach and moved the wand around for a few minutes. Then she turned the screen in my direction. 8 weeks and 2 days, she said. Everything looked normal and healthy. She asked if I wanted to hear the heartbeat. I said yes before I had time to stop myself. The sound was fast. Much faster than I expected from an organ barely the size of an almond. The doctor came in afterward and went through all those statistics about women my age. Risk of Down syndrome, risks of childbirth, potential complications. She said 42 wasn't ideal, but it wasn't uncommon either. She gave me pamphlets about nutrition and prenatal vitamins. I spent 30 minutes in my car in the parking lot afterward. I was hoping they'd find something wrong. Something that would make the decision for me. But they didn't find anything. Everything was healthy. When I got home, Julio was sitting at the kitchen table. I told him everything. That the tests were good. That the due date was early spring. That the statistics the doctor mentioned indicated that everything was within normal range. And then, with a voice that sounded distant even to me, I said I would schedule the procedure for the following week. But even as I spoke those words, something inside me screamed to stop. A small, distant voice that whispered I was making a mistake. That maybe, just maybe, that rapid heartbeat I had heard was important. That little being growing inside me deserved a chance. Julio just nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't fight back. He just motioned for me to continue with my plans. But in the days that followed, something changed between us. A tension hung in the air. Julio watched me when he thought I didn't notice. When I ate, when I put my hand on my belly without realizing it, when I just sat in silence staring at nothing. I had scheduled the procedure for a Tuesday. It was a rainy and cold day when I woke up that morning. My entire body was shaking. I didn't know if it was cold, fear, or regret. Maybe all three. Julio was already awake when I came out of the bathroom. He was in the kitchen making coffee. He made it exactly the way I like it. That destroyed me a little. How could he be so kind when I was about to do something that I knew would hurt him, despite all the words we had said about everything being okay? I drove to the clinic alone. Julio offered to come, but I refused. I didn't want him to see. I didn't want him to carry that weight too. In the waiting room, there were other women. Some looked too young. Others looked too old. All of them had that same empty look in their eyes. As if we were all in a place between worlds. Between one decision and another. The nurse called me and asked me to remove my clothes. I put on one of those paper gowns that leave your spine exposed. I rehearsed the procedure in my head several times. It was simple. Quick. So many women did this every day. The doctor came in. He had a neutral face. The kind of face you probably acquire after years of doing the same thing daily. He asked if I was sure. I said yes. But my voice lied. As he prepared the instruments, my phone vibrated in my purse in the other room. I knew it was Julio. He said he would be thinking of me. That he loved me regardless of which choice I made. That message destroyed me. I asked the doctor to wait. He sighed. Clearly he had seen this before. Women who changed their minds. Women who came back weeks later. Women who carried the weight of that decision for the rest of their lives. I asked to sit down. I asked for a glass of water. I asked for time. And in that moment, in the waiting room of a clinic on a rainy day, something simply broke inside me. Not in the bad way, but in the way that makes you finally see things as they really are. I wanted that baby. God help me, but I wanted it. Despite my age. Despite the fear. Despite having spent the last 20 years promising I didn't want it. I left that clinic without doing anything. I just grabbed my purse and left. The receptionist asked if I'd come back another day. I just shook my head, unable to speak. I drove to the beach. I needed air. I needed space. I needed time to process that I had just chosen life. That I had chosen to be a mother at 42 years old, despite everything. When Julio called me, I didn't answer. When he sent messages, I didn't answer. I just spent hours looking at the ocean, feeling the wind on my face, and touching my belly. You were there. Somehow you were real. You were mine. When I finally came home that night, Julio was on the porch. He knew. Just by looking at my face, he knew that I had changed my mind. He didn't say anything. He just hugged me. Held me so tightly I almost had to ask for air. And I felt tears on my neck. When he finally spoke, Julio said 3 things I'll never forget. I'm sorry for trying to be logical when you needed support. We're going to have a child together. And we're going to make it work. I completely fell apart in that moment. Years of pressure, guilt, fear. It all came out of me in that embrace. Julio just held me while I cried. In the days that followed, we began to reorganize our lives. Julio insisted we tell his children. I begged to wait a little longer. Until we got through the first trimester. Until things became more real. But Julio decided to tell Mateus first, his oldest son. Mateus is 42 years old, the same age as me. He's successful in his career, works at a large law firm. And when Julio told him I was pregnant, the reaction was, well, let's just say it wasn't exactly unconditional support. His first question was whether the pregnancy was planned. His second was whether I had the mental clarity to really agree to this. Yes, I hear how insulting that was. But Mateus just continued. He said that he, as a lawyer, had some concerns. That he would like to schedule a meeting with a real estate and estate attorney to protect the interests of everyone involved. That phrase, protect the interests of everyone involved. As if my baby were a financial threat and not a family member. Julio tried to downplay it. He said we'd have time to think about wills and testaments later. That for now, everything was fine and it was time to celebrate. Mateus didn't celebrate. The twins, Fernanda and Gabriela, had an even worse reaction. Fernanda is a successful psychologist. Gabriela works in finance. Both have children and lives that seem perfectly organized. When they found out I was pregnant, they organized what I can only describe as an intervention. They came to our house together, something they rarely do, and I sat in the living room while Julio stood by my side, holding my hand. Fernanda started. Very calm, very professional. Like a psychologist would speak to a patient in crisis. She said she understood that late motherhood could be an attractive fantasy, that there was extensive literature about last chance baby syndrome, where older women fantasize about motherhood as a way to find meaning or importance in their lives. Meaning? Importance? I was a pregnant woman, not a patient who needed a diagnosis. Gabriela continued. Numbers. Mental spreadsheets that she had clearly prepared. How much it costs to raise a child. How much college costs. How much healthcare costs. And of course, what the impact would be on the estate her children expected to inherit. That was the phrase that made me stand up. Expected to inherit? Your father is alive. He's healthy. And you already have your own successful lives. Why are you worried about an inheritance you don't even know when it will arrive? Gabriela stared at me. Her eyes were cold. Because now it will have to be divided. And because a child of a woman who is entering menopause is a risk. That word. Risk. As if I were a variable in an equation they were trying to solve, not a person who had the right to make choices about my own body. Julio stood up. His voice, which almost never gets raised, became firm. Enough. This is my child. Or daughter. This is my son or daughter, and I will be here for it. As much as my age allows. Daniela is my wife, and this baby's father will be me. If you can't be supportive, then you can leave my house. Gabriela and Fernanda left. They left angry, with tight lips, and left that heavy silence that settles when family simply decides you're not part of them. Mateus kept coming. But now he came with papers. Legal documents. Letters from a lawyer he had hired on our behalf, supposedly to protect everyone's interests. One of those documents was a request for me to sign an agreement waiving the baby's inheritance rights. I read that 3 times before I could believe it was real. Mateus presented it as if it were a completely reasonable thing, as if mothers frequently sign papers waiving their own children's rights. Julio nearly attacked him. But it was me who was calm now. Strangely calm. As if that situation was so absurd that just rolling with it was the answer. I won't sign, I simply said. You don't understand the implications, Mateus replied, as if it were obvious. I understand perfectly. You're asking me to waive my child's rights. My child who is still in the first trimester. Before he's even born, you've already decided he's not part of this family. Mateus blinked. As if the idea that I could refuse simply hadn't computed in his brain. My father will be too old to take care of a child. If something happens to him, then I'll be here. Because I'm the mother. Mateus left. But not before leaving a letter from his lawyer requesting DNA tests to confirm that the child was really Julio's. Yes, you read that correctly. They wanted DNA tests. As if I had some reason to get pregnant by my husband with another man. As if that was some elaborate financial trap I had planned when I realized my period was late. When Julio saw that letter, he sat down heavily. His face aged 10 years in seconds. Did they already prepare this? Already plan to take custody? Already plan to prove you're lying about paternity? I had no answers. I just held his hand. That night, Julio got on his computer and sent an email to all 3 of his children. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't threatening. It was simply final. He said they were his children and he loved them. But that he was not an investment fund. That his life and his choices were not a matter of family finances. That he was having a baby with my mother, his wife, and that if they couldn't accept that without trying to destroy my life or his, then it would be better to keep their distance until they could act like adults who respect their parents. He sent a copy to a lawyer. A lawyer he hired to protect me. Because apparently, that's what our lives had become. Not a celebration of new life, but a legal battle of emotional exhaustion. The lawyers contacted us the next day. Mateus's was first. A woman named Patricia, who spoke in such legally structured language that she seemed to be reading from a script. She explained, with a tone that suggested I was a child who needed everything explained slowly, that her client had legitimate rights to protect his financial interests. Financial interests. It always came back to that. Our lawyer, a man named Roberto whom Julio had hired, responded that any attempt to force DNA tests without proper consent would be considered discriminatory and potentially criminal. That any discussion about inheritance would need to wait until the child was born, and only if there was some legitimate reason to question paternity. There was no legitimate reason. Just greed masked as family concern. But that didn't stop Mateus. He and his lawyers kept sending letters. Each one a little more aggressive. Each one with more veiled threats. They began to suggest that maybe Julio wasn't in his right mind. That maybe he needed a psychological evaluation. That maybe he didn't have the capacity to consent to such a radical situation. Basically, they were trying to have him declared incompetent. When I read that letter, I just started laughing. A hysterical laugh I couldn't stop. Julio was at my side trying to calm me down while I laughed at the complete absurdity of it all. My husband was 65 years old, but he still worked as a consultant. He had a sharp mind. He was in good health. And because he decided to have a child with me, his children wanted to have him declared mentally unfit. The hypocrisy was almost beautiful in its purity. Roberto explained that we would need to file a preventive lawsuit. That it would be better to be aggressive than reactive. That we needed to document everything that Mateus, Fernanda, and Gabriela were doing. Because, apparently, this was harassment. And we needed to protect ourselves. I was in my 3rd month of pregnancy when things really exploded. Julio went to work one normal day. He came home with an expression I had never seen on his face before. It was as if he had aged a decade in those few hours. His 3 children had tracked him down at work. Together. Coordinated. Like a planned intervention. They wanted to know if he had been coerced in any way. If perhaps he was under the influence of drugs. If he really understands the implications of having a child at 66 years old. His own children, and they were questioning his mental sanity because he decided to have a child with his wife. Julio told them to leave. He said he wouldn't answer any more questions. He said they were crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. They left. But they left more papers. More letters from lawyers. More threats. That night, Julio simply lay down in bed and cried. I had never seen him cry. He was the strong one. The person who had the answers. And there he was, broken. Because his own children were treating him like an enemy. I held him while he cried. And to be honest, I cried too. But the next day, I was furious. Furious in a way that had no words. Furious that these three adults, with their successful and secure lives, were trying to destroy mine out of pure greed. Furious because they couldn't see that their father was happy. That we were happy. I called our lawyer. I said I wanted to sue. I wanted action for harassment. I wanted them to learn a lesson about trying to destroy other people. Roberto was careful. He explained that lawsuits are expensive and emotionally draining, that we would need to be prepared for everything to be exposed. Every choice we made, every decision, every private moment analyzed. But he also said that we had a strong case, that their behavior was clearly abusive and potentially criminal. So we filed suit. That was the moment when everything became real in a different way. Suddenly, it wasn't just a family discussion. It was official. It was on record. There were papers with legal words that described my marriage, my pregnancy, my reproductive rights, as if they were items in a lawsuit. Mateus responded with a countersuit, alleging that his earlier action was a legitimate attempt to protect the rights of an elderly father who might be getting manipulated. Manipulated. As if I had some mysterious mental power that made me get pregnant on purpose at 42 years old so that I could eventually get the money of a man who was still working and healthy. Their logic was so twisted that it would be funny if it weren't so destructive. My pregnancy hormones didn't help. I oscillated between anger and sadness. Days when I wanted to go out and destroy something. Days when I just wanted to wrap myself in a blanket and never leave bed. My obstetrician started to worry about stress and anxiety. She offered medication. She offered therapy. I refused. I didn't want anything that could affect the baby. So I just dealt with it. I dealt with the letters from lawyers. I dealt with calls from friends asking if it was true that Julio and I were suing his children. I dealt with the fact that our private life was becoming local gossip. Because in small towns, these things spread. Friends of friends share. People start to have opinions about situations they don't understand. I received anonymous messages on social media. Some supportive. Others brutally cruel. Women in my situation sharing their stories of family conflict. Criticism from strangers saying I was selfish for getting pregnant at 42. I tried to ignore it. Tried to focus only on my baby. On the pregnancy. On the fact that there was a small life growing inside me that didn't ask for any of this. My obstetrician said the baby was healthy. That everything was progressing normally. That in 3 months I would have my son or daughter. That information was the only thing that kept me steady. The baby was real. The baby was mine. And no lawsuit would change that. But then, for months into my pregnancy, things got even more bizarre. Gabriella sent a letter. Not through her lawyer. Directly to me. Personally. How she found my private email address, I have no idea. The letter started casually. As if we were friends. She said she was worried about me. That she, as a psychologist, saw signs of possible early postpartum depression. That maybe I should consider seeking professional help before things got worse. But then the letter changed tone. She said she understood that I probably felt I needed to compete with Julio's children. That was common in insecure women who entered already established families. That maybe getting pregnant was a way to guarantee my place in Julio's life. I read that letter and felt my blood freeze. She was literally trying to use cheap psychology to suggest I was unbalanced. That my pregnancy was a symptom of mental problems. I showed the letter to Roberto. He was furious. He sent a cease and desist letter to Gabriella, saying that any additional communication that could be interpreted as harassment, defamation, or interference with my client's mental well-being would be documented and used in court. Gabriella didn't send any more letters. But the damage was already done. I was afraid now. Afraid to leave the house. Afraid that someone might agree with her. Afraid that maybe she was right somehow. My therapist. Yes, I finally started seeing one. Said these were normal anxious thoughts. That there was nothing wrong with me. That being under this kind of pressure was enough to make anyone question themselves. At 20 weeks of pregnancy, I had a diagnostic ultrasound. The kind that looks for abnormalities, where they see if there's something wrong with the baby. I was nervous. Not because of biological things, but because over the past few months, everything that could go wrong had gone wrong emotionally. I was prepared for the doctor to find something. Something that would make all of this even more complicated. But there was nothing. The baby was a girl. Perfect. Healthy. All chromosomes in the right places. All parts developing normally. When I saw that image on the screen, that little silhouette that was my daughter, something inside me calmed down. Regardless of everything that was happening out there, that was real. That was pure. That was mine. Julio cried when I told him. Not tears of sadness this time. Tears of joy. For the first time in months, I saw him genuinely smile. A girl, he said. We have a daughter. We have. Us. Together. That word meant everything in that moment. But the peace was brief. A week later, I received a document formally requesting DNA tests, now signed by a judge who had apparently agreed that there was sufficient reason to question paternity. My lawyer was so furious that he literally threw his pen on the desk. This is absurd, he said. There is absolutely nothing that justifies this. No allegations. No suggestion that you're not being honest about paternity. So why did the judge agree? I asked. Because Mateus's lawyer is good at his job. And because some people, even in positions of authority, can't see beyond well-constructed arguments. So Julio took a DNA test. Not because there was any reason to, but because the alternative was having the government make a decision for us. The test confirmed the obvious. My daughter was Julio's daughter. Biologically and legally. You would think that would end things. It didn't end. Now Mateus changed tactics. If he couldn't question paternity, then he would question my ability to be a mother. He started gathering evidence that I was unstable, that there were problems in my marriage, that Julio was being coerced. He found out about my therapy. Apparently, that was evidence of mental instability. He found out that I had taken leave from work. Apparently, that was evidence that I wasn't functioning properly. It never mattered that both things were completely normal. That therapy is healthy. That maternity leave is a right. He was just building a case. Structure by structure. Allegation by allegation. Hoping that something would stick. Hoping that something would give him some leverage. My daughter was born at the end of February. A cold and gray day when she decided she had spent enough time in my belly, and it was time to meet the world. Her name is Sophia. And when I placed her in Julio's arms for the first time, he simply broke. Tears streamed down his face as he held her as if she were made of glass. Hello, my daughter, he whispered. Welcome to the world. And in that moment, in that hospital room, no one could hurt her. No one could question her right to exist. No one could turn her birth into a legal proceeding. She just was. And we loved her. But when I brought Sophia home a week later, a letter was waiting for us. Mateus had filed a motion for a custody hearing, arguing that Julio, now 66 years old with a newborn child, should have shared custody with him until the child reached adulthood, in case Julio was unable to care for her. He was effectively trying to become the legal guardian of my daughter. My 1-week-old daughter. Roberto said it was the most frivolous case he'd ever seen, but that we still needed to take it seriously. That we needed to prepare documentation. We needed witnesses. We needed to prove that Julio was a capable father. I was sleeping 3 hours a night, breastfeeding, changing diapers, and now I also needed to prepare legal arguments for the right to keep my daughter. There were moments when I just wanted to give up. Moments when I thought it would be easier to just let Mateus have what he wanted. But then I would look at Sophia, at that perfect little face, at the grip of her hand on my finger. And I remembered why I was doing this. No one was going to take my daughter from me. Not while I had breath in my body. The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks after Sophia was born. 6 weeks. As if that time was enough for me to recover my body, learn to be a mother, and prepare a legal defense against people who were technically my family. My obstetrician said I wasn't ready to leave the house for long periods. That my body was still healing. That breastfeeding was exhausting. But the legal system doesn't care about biology. It only cares about deadlines. Roberto prepared me. Hours in his office while Sophia slept in a stroller at my side. He had me answer questions that Mateus would probably ask. He taught me not to get defensive. Not to be emotional. To just answer the facts. You're pregnant by a man 23 years older than you, he would say, playing the role of Mateus's lawyer. How can you claim that wasn't a financial calculation? Because I love him, I would answer. And it was true. Love can be confused with other things. Financial dependence, for example. I work. I have my own income. I have my own bank account. I'm completely financially independent. But you knew Julio was wealthy when you started dating him. I knew he was successful. It wasn't a secret. But that's not why I'm with him. These practice sessions left me exhausted. Not because the questions were difficult, but because they represented the fundamental lie that Mateus was trying to tell. That my marriage was a transaction. That my baby was a bargaining chip. Julio was also being prepared. Roberto warned him that there would be questions about his mental health. About his ability to care for a newborn. About whether he really wanted this or if he was being manipulated by me. Julio just nodded through everything. But I could see how it hurt. See how the questions questioned him so fundamentally. One night, about a week before the hearing, I found Julio lying in bed, simply staring at the ceiling. "Do you want to reconsider?" I asked. "Do you want to just let Mateus have shared custody so this all ends?" Julio turned to face me. His eyes were red. He had been crying. "Absolutely not," he said. "This is my daughter. I will fight for her with every fiber of my being. But," he paused, "I'm scared, Daniela. I'm scared that maybe he's right. That maybe it's unfair to bring a child into the world when you don't know how much time you'll have with her." I lay down next to him. I placed my head on his chest. I could hear his heart beating rapidly. "You didn't choose to be here by accident," I said. "You chose to fight for Sophia. You chose to be her father. That's all that matters. And if I die, what if Sophia grows up without a father? Then she will have had a father who loved her more than anything in the world. For the time he had. That's all that anyone can offer." He didn't respond. He just held me. The day of the hearing arrived with a gray and cold morning. I was up so early I practically hadn't slept. I put on a gray suit that made me look professional but not severe. Roberto had insisted that appearance mattered. That judges were human. That they judged with their eyes as much as with their ears. Sophia had stayed with a babysitter. Just for a few hours. I breastfed her before I left, wanting to guarantee that she knew I loved her. As if she could forget in 3 hours. The courtroom was exactly as I imagined it. Dark wood. People in suits. A judge who looked bored even before we started. Mateus was there with his lawyer. Fernanda and Gabriela were also present, sitting behind him like silent supporters. They didn't look at me when I entered. Roberto put a hand on my back. A gesture of silent support. The judge explained what was happening. That Mateus had requested a hearing to determine whether Julio was capable of caring for a newborn at 66 years of age. That the court needed to determine if there was risk to the child. Risk. That word again. Mateus's lawyer began. He was eloquent. Well-spoken. He presented arguments that sounded reasonable if you didn't look too deeply into them. Men who are 66 years old have a higher likelihood of premature death. Men that age often don't have the stamina to care for babies. The mother was 23 years younger, and therefore had more influence. There was potential for neglect simply due to fatigue and physical limitations. None of this was based on facts about Julio specifically, just generalizations about age. When it was Roberto's turn, he was calm and focused. "Your Honor, what we're hearing is age discrimination disguised as parental concern. My client Julio currently works as a consultant. He passed a complete physical examination. There is absolutely no evidence that he is incapable of caring for his daughter. But the age," Mateus's lawyer began. "Age by itself is not indicative of capability. Men in their 30s and 40s have children and leave them with babysitters while they work, exactly as my client can do. There is no difference in the level of care simply because he is 66 instead of 46. The judge raised his hand. "Counselors, can you describe exactly what shared custody would be proposed?" Mateus stood up. "Your Honor, I suggest that Sophia remain with her mother during the week while I'm working. But on weekends and during vacation weeks, she would stay with me. That way, if something happened to Julio, there would already be a custody arrangement in place." I nearly lost it. If something happened to Julio. As if it were inevitable. As if he were defective and about to fail. Roberto stood up before I could say anything. "Your Honor, let me be clear. What my client is proposing is that he, a man who has no legal, emotional, or caregiving relationship with this child, assumes custody if something happens to the father. But note that there is no motion for the mother, who is present every day, to have backup custody. The implication is that if Julio dies, Mateus wants this child. This is not about safety. This is about control." The judge turned to Mateus. "How would you respond to that?" Mateus blinked. Clearly he hadn't expected to be confronted so directly. "Well, the mother, she is emotionally unstable. She is in therapy. She is in therapy because she was harassed by your clients for months, Roberto answered. And being in therapy is not an indication of instability. It is an indication that someone is seeking professional support during a difficult time. What is your clinical diagnosis of Daniela? Well, I'm not qualified to. Exactly. You're not. You're a lawyer building a case on nothing. The judge banged his gavel. Enough. I've heard enough. He looked at Julio. Mr. Julio, do you have the financial capacity to care for this child? Yes, Your Honor. Are you in good health? Yes, Your Honor. I passed a complete physical examination last month. Do you wish to have full custody of this child with her mother? Yes, Your Honor. Absolutely. The judge turned to Mateus. And what is your relationship with this child? How many times have you seen her? Well, Sophia is 6 weeks old. I haven't seen her yet, but you haven't seen her? You're filing a motion for shared custody of a child you've never met. The circumstances are that you disagree with late parenthood and are trying to use the legal system as a form of control. Motion denied. That was it. Just like that. The judge left the courtroom. Mateus stood there, shocked, while his lawyer whispered something in his ear. I couldn't breathe properly. Roberto put his hand on my shoulder. You won, he whispered. When we left the courthouse, Julio simply held me. Held me so tight I almost lost my ability to breathe. Sophia is ours, he said. She stays with us. I cried. Tears of relief. Tears of anger that had sustained me for months. Tears of joy that we had made it. Mateus caught up with us as we were leaving the building. This isn't over, he said, his voice hard. I'm going to appeal. Go right ahead, Roberto answered. And take the time to get to know your niece better before you waste more time and money on a battle you've already lost. The appeal was never filed. It seems that between the verdict and the next filing date, Mateus and his lawyers finally realized they didn't have a case, that it was based on prejudice, not facts. But the emotional cost had already been paid. My marriage with Julio was never stronger. We had been through fire together and come out the other side. But there was also a scar. A wound that didn't completely disappear. Julio rarely spoke with his other children now. Fernanda occasionally sent messages asking how Sophia was. But there was no warmth in them. Just the motions of maintaining peace. Gabriela didn't contact again. And Mateus? Well, Mateus was water under the bridge we had completely burned. My life with Sophia and Julio began to assume some form of normalcy. Sophia grew. We swore not to celebrate every milestone because we had already lost so much time. But we celebrated anyway. Her first smile. Her first laugh. Her first day of not crying for more than an hour. People on the street often asked if Julio was my father. If Sophia was my granddaughter. Some assumed I was a babysitter. Those moments hurt. Not because I cared what strangers thought, but because it represented the reality of our marriage. There would always be questions. There would always be doubts. There would always be people who believed there was something sinister about us. But we knew the truth. I loved Julio. He loved me. Sophia loved us. And we were a family. Life with Sophia for the next 2 years was curiously calm. Calm like the aftermath of a storm. You know, that heavy silence that comes when everything finally stops falling apart? It was like that. I went back to work when Sophia was 4 months old. My boss welcomed me back as if I had been on vacation, not as if I had been through a legal battle that could have cost me custody of my daughter. That's how professional life is. It moves forward, regardless of what happens in your personal world. Julio continued consulting. He works less now, basically just projects he can do from home. He wants to be present for Sophia. He wants to be there when she wakes up. He wants to help with night feedings, even though I'm the one who breastfeeds her mainly. In the first months, I constantly thought about Mateus, about his threats, about how he had tried to take my daughter from me. Anger lived inside me like an organ. It beat along with my heart. But over time, the anger transformed into indifference. And indifference was much more effective. Not because I forgave him, but because it simply stopped mattering. Sophia turned 2 in February. Same month she was born. We threw a small party. Just close friends and my family. Julio's family was not invited. My mother brought cakes. My sister, the one who was pregnant when it all started, brought her older son, who was now 4 years old, and the baby, who was 1 year old. They played together while the adults drank wine and talked. Julio was sitting on the couch, holding Sophia as she opened presents. He watched her with that look that still made my heart beat faster. A father completely in love with his daughter. Completely dedicated to her. That day, I received an email. It was from Roberto, my lawyer. The subject was, information you should know. I opened it when Sophia was asleep that night. The text was brief, professional, but there was something strange about it. As if Roberto was carefully choosing his words. He wrote that he had received a call from a colleague who works in family law. Apparently, Mateus had contacted him asking him to explore the possibility of tightening his case even further, that he had consulted with multiple lawyers. None of them took it. The reason? Because there was no case. Because everything Mateus had was destroyed at the hearing. And any lawyer who took the case would just be taking his money while wasting time. Roberto wrote that he thought I should know that Mateus was becoming increasingly desperate, and that desperate people sometimes do irrational things. I showed the email to Julio. He simply shook his head. Let him try. We won. That won't change. But there was a concern in his voice that I hadn't heard before. 3 weeks later, I received a call from an unknown number. The woman on the other end introduced herself as being from an investment fund. She said she had received some anonymous complaints about my husband and would like to investigate. Complaints? What kind of complaints? She was vague. Something about possible misuse of company resources. Something about conflicts of interest. Nothing specific. Just enough to seem credible. I hung up the phone and called Roberto. That's defamation, he said immediately. And it's easy to trace. Anyone making that type of accusation would leave a digital trail. But we never found out exactly where it came from. Roberto investigated, but couldn't find anything concrete. Just whispers. Just enough to cause problems without being traceable. After 4 such incidents in 2 weeks, Roberto brought Julio and me together and proposed something I didn't expect. We could file for a protective order against Mateus, he said, due to the pattern of harassment and defamation. My first instinct was to refuse. We had already been to court. We had already won. A protective order would seem excessive. Like we were being the bullies. But Julio agreed. He needs to learn that there are consequences, Julio said. His voice was calm, but there was a hardness there that I rarely heard. So we filed a motion for a protective order. Mateus appeared in court personally this time. His confidence had disappeared. He looked smaller, older, as if the last few months had drained him. The judge heard the details. The calls. The emails. The anonymous accusations. Are you telling me that you made these accusations? The judge asked Mateus. No, Your Honor. I didn't. But do you have knowledge of who made them? No, Your Honor. But you would benefit if your father lost his job? Mateus didn't answer. I'll take that as a yes. Protective order granted. Mr. Mateus cannot make contact of any kind with Julio, Daniela, or Sophia. Cannot enter their workplaces. Cannot be within 500 meters of their residences. That was another victory. But this time there was no celebration. There was only the understanding that a war had begun that Mateus seemed determined to win, regardless of the cost. 6 months later, I received a phone call from Fernanda. She was crying. Really crying. She said she needed to talk to me in person. That there was something I needed to know. My first instinct was to refuse. What did Fernanda have to say that mattered now? She had tried to diagnose me as mentally unstable. She had sided with her brother while he tried to take my daughter from me. But there was something in her voice. A desperation that couldn't be faked. We met at a coffee shop. A neutral location. Julio wanted to come with me, but I refused. I felt that Fernanda needed to say something without the pressure of Julio being there. When I saw her, I barely recognized her. She had lost weight. There were wrinkles around her eyes that weren't there before. She looked broken. Thank you for coming, she said, her hands trembling as she held her coffee cup. What's happening? I asked. Fernanda took a deep breath. I can't be in direct contact with you because of the protective order. But I need you to know something about Mateus. About what he did. What he's planning to do. My stomach dropped. He didn't stop, Fernanda continued. The accusations you traced? He made all of them. And there's more. He hired someone. A private investigator. He's trying to find anything he can use against you. Anything he can use to prove you're a threat to Sophia. Why? I asked. Why does he keep going? He lost. The court decided. Because he can't accept having lost to you. He can't accept that our father chose you and Sophia over us. He can't accept that you're not a villain in a story he's telling. You're just a woman who loved our father and had a baby. And it drives him crazy. I banged my cup on the table. So he's going to keep trying? No. Fernanda took a deep breath. I'm going to stop him. She showed me documents. Documents she had collected without Mateus knowing. Email exchanges with the private investigator. Payment records. Transcripts of phone conversations he had recorded illegally. How did you get this? I asked. I'm his sister, Fernanda said simply. And when I started working as a psychologist, I learned to notice when people are acting irrationally. Mateus was diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder as a child. He still has it. And when he becomes obsessed with something, he can't stop. He can't let go. That explains it, but doesn't justify it. No, it doesn't justify it, Fernanda agreed. Nothing justifies what he did. What he tried to do to you. What he tried to do to his own father. Fernanda started crying for real now. Tears streaming down her face as she apologized. Not in words, but in her entire body. Gabriella and I just followed Mateus, she said. We didn't question. We assumed that if he thought it was necessary, then it must be. But it was wrong, Daniela. It was so wrong. You didn't do anything. You just loved our father. And we tried to destroy you for it. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to say it was okay, that I understood. But it wasn't true. It wasn't okay. They tried to destroy my marriage. They tried to take my daughter from me. They tried to humiliate my husband. But another part of me could see that Fernanda truly regretted it. That she had finally seen how far Mateus had gone. And that she was risking her own relationship with him by coming to me. What do you want me to do? I asked. Use these documents, Fernanda answered. Make him stop. No matter what you have to do. Because if you don't, he'll never stop. He can't stop. I took those documents straight to Roberto. When Roberto saw everything, his face went very pale. This is... He paused, searching for words. This is criminally serious. Illegal recording. Hiring an investigator for harassment. Multiple violations of a protective order. Can we sue him? I asked. We can do much more than sue. We can report him criminally. And we did. The police were called. The investigation began. And when it was over, there were charges. Multiple charges. Harassment. Illegal surveillance. Violation of protective order. Hiring a third party to do his dirty work. Mateus was arrested. Not for long. His lawyer got him out quickly. But he was arrested. When I heard the news, I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel victory. I felt nothing, actually. As if I had finally reached a place so empty of emotion that I couldn't even be surprised by anything he did anymore. The only thing my body did was breathe a sigh of relief. Because it was all over. Really over this time. There was no more legal move he could make. There was no more card he could play. Julio received the news with more composure. He just nodded and went back to helping Sofia get dressed for school. It's okay, he told me that night as we lay in bed. It's okay now. We can move forward. But moving forward was more complicated than it seemed. Because even though Mateus was out of our way, the damage had been done. Feelings had been hurt. Relationships had been broken. Fernanda attempted reconciliation. She started visiting. She brought gifts for Sofia. She tried to build a bridge between us and the rest of the family. And you know what? Over time, that bridge started to hold. Not because I really forgave her, but because Sofia deserved to know her aunt. Because resentment is a heavy weight to carry, and because Fernanda had really chosen to do the right thing. Gabriella also came to apologize, though in a much more tentative way. She sent a letter. A real letter. Not an email. Paper and handwritten ink. It said she had been a coward. That she had followed Mateus out of fear. That she had let her prejudices about age gap marriages blind her to what was really important. That it was family. I read that letter and cried. Because there was something genuine in it. Something you can't fake. I invited Gabriella for coffee too. We had a better conversation. Not perfect, but better. As for Mateus, well, his life really fell apart after that. The criminal charges destroyed him professionally. His law firm terminated his contract. His clients abandoned him. He couldn't get another job anywhere because any background check revealed everything. He moved out of town, to a place where nobody knew him. And in the last 2 years since all of that, we've heard very little from him. Occasionally, through third parties, we hear that he was trying to rebuild his life in some other state. That he was trying to start over. Part of me felt sorry for him. Not because he deserved it, but because his obsession with destroying us simply destroyed him instead. Poetic, in a tragic way. Now Sofia is 5 years old. She started school last month. She is an intelligent, cheerful child who loves to draw and asks questions about absolutely everything. She knows nothing about the legal battle. She doesn't know about the uncle who tried to take her away from her parents. She doesn't know that her existence was contested in a courtroom. And I will do everything in my power to make sure she never knows. So that she grows up believing that the world is a place where people love each other, where families support each other, where judges do the right thing. Julio is now 71 years old. His hair has turned grayer. He moves a little more slowly. But his mind is as sharp as it's always been. And his love for Sofia hasn't diminished one bit. There are days when I see him playing with Sofia in the backyard and I think about how close I came to losing this. How close I came to letting other people push me away from the most important thing in my life. Because it's easy to question yourself. It's easy to let other people make you question. It's easy to believe that maybe you're wrong. That maybe you're being selfish. That maybe you made a mistake. But then you see your daughter's face. You see the way she holds your husband's hand. You hear her call him daddy. And you know you weren't wrong. That it was right all along. My only regret is that it took so long to believe in myself. To not let the voices of other people convince me that I was the villain in a story I never asked to be part of. But now I understand. I understand that sometimes you just have to stand firm. You have to believe in your own worth. You have to fight for what is yours. And that simply being happy with the people you love is the most revolutionary act of resistance you can make. Because there is nothing more threatening to people than someone who refuses to be defeated. Someone who chooses love despite all the logic that says it's wrong. Someone who simply says no to skepticism and bitterness. This is my story. It's Sofia's story. It's Julio's story. It's the story of a 42-year-old woman who thought she wouldn't want to be a mother. Who discovered she was wrong about that. And who was willing to fight for her truth, regardless of the cost. Late pregnancy was not a mistake. The life we built was not a mistake. And Sofia was not a mistake. And despite all the hell we went through, I would do it all again. Because at the end of the day, when Sofia is sleeping safely in her room, when Julio is at my side in bed, when I can hear their breathing in the dark, I know I did the right thing. I did the right thing for me. The right thing for Sofia. The right thing for our love. And that's all that matters. If this story touched you in any way, please like and subscribe to the channel for more stories of overcoming injustice. Your comments and support make all the difference to other people who might be going through similar situations. Until the next story.